Again, thank you all for being with us here today for our Bayou Culture Collaborative. It's a very special day for us because this is the last gathering of the season, and we've got a lot of wonderful things prepared for you guys today. One of those things, one of those special things that we have for you today is we have Dr. Pam Jenkins, who will be presenting to us today, Living with a Sense of Place at Risk. We're very excited to have her with us as well. Xero is supposed to be with us today, and we've got his poem that he has developed for us based on all of the presentations that have been given throughout 2022. So we're very happy to have him with us. Of course, you know all the familiar faces that you've seen throughout this year. This is our BCC team, without which we could not be able to produce these programs for everyone. Again, sort of our disclaimer, if you've been with us throughout the year, you know that this whole series of discussions is just that. It's starting the conversation. It's trying to figure out what it is that we can do to live successfully along the coast. We don't claim to have any answers of what you should or should not do, but we're here to figure those things out together. List of our partners here. Again, these folks kind of represent the people that you've seen, our faces that you've seen earlier. And then, of course, funding to help make this program possible. So again, thank you all very much for being with us here, our last gathering of the season. So this will be the agenda for today. We're going to have Dr. Jenkins present to us, and then we'll have a question and answer session with her. We'll ask her what's her hope for the coast. Then we will play the poem by Xero. We've also made a greatest hits video of 2022 that we'll share with you, and then a few announcements at the end before we go into our informal discussion session.
Jonathan, if I could.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd just like to remind everybody if they'd please introduce themselves in the chat.
Thank you very much for that. I got a little bit carried away with the mistletoe and completely forgot to ask for introductions. Thank you so much for reminding us of that, Mike. So yes, please take some time, introduce yourself in the chat so that we know who's in the room. And so with no further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Pam Jenkins, who many of you already know and love, and we are very appreciative for you to be here with us this December, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with this crew that I have great respect for. I have known Jonathan and Gary for a long time, but it's been my pleasure to meet Maida and Michael and get to know the work that you guys have done. I'm so excited about the kind of work that's been going on in this collaborative, and it's my pleasure to be here today. And I also know that two of my former students who have well exceeded my expectations in their life are here, and I want to welcome Tara and Corey and know that some of your work might show up on the screen. Today, it's not an academic talk, really. There is some social science in here, but it's more personal. 21 years ago, Shirley Laska founded CHART. I started working there. Our first project was a HUD grant with David Burley and some other students to interview people in 6 coastal parishes about their lives. And we were interested in their view of climate change, but we never asked them about climate change. We let them tell us, and everyone did. And so for 20 years or so, I still work part-time for CHART, even though I retired 7 years ago. I've sat in people's living rooms, underneath their houses, in their FEMA trailers, outdoors with them, talking about their lives. And it's been the gift for me to learn about people in this way. And so what I'm doing today is I got really excited. I started pulling pieces, photographs I loved, quotes I loved, and a way of looking at this. At the end of my talk, which is not very long, I'm going to ask you, when you think of the shifting sense of place that we're living in, what occurs for you? And that's the question I want to begin with our discussion. The idea that we can know a place and be linked to that place is powerful. It is in that knowing that we see who we are, that we add to the culture, that we find our identity, our families, our community. This knowledge is grounded, but what happens to this place, to what we've built when it changes? We've lived, all of us, through enormous changes. We can start way back in the 60s with some storms. For most of us, we begin counting our time at Katrina. And, you know, like many of you, my house flooded during Katrina. You can see the rebuild in the back. And it wasn't the social science that comforted me, although all of us social scientists wrote like we were coming up for tenure. It was the art. It was the music. It was Spencer Boren singing about the long black line. It was Hollywood Delahousse doing his spoken word about Katrina. It was the poetry. It was the culture itself that comforted me. And so I start today with this quote from Eudora Welty. It is only too easy to conceive of a bomb that could destroy all trace of places as we know them, in life and through books, could also destroy all feelings as we know them. So irretrievably and so happily are recognition, memory, history, valor, love, all the instincts of poetry and praise, worship and endeavor bound up in place. You know, I'm not from here. I've lived here 42 years, actually. And I think about having webbed feet now. But I grew up in the flatlands in the Midwest, in a small farming community. So at the same time that I was doing this work along the coast, I was going back to my hometown, involved in a really long project where I was interviewing the residents about their lives and collecting their photographs. So part of what you're going to see today is both the pictures of yourselves and the pictures of this flatland that has a lot of similarities between where we live and them. So part of this question that I want to answer is, what will we lose and what will we remember? So this is from the Midwest. This is one of my earliest photographs I found from this small town. And the reason I show it to you, that I love it, is that the sky and the earth meet each other. You have the landscape and the sky touch, which you also have here. What you don't have in the Midwest is water. And then I just took this picture. You all know this. I took this about a month ago outside Chauvin of a skeleton tree, a tree who is dying because of saltwater intrusion and yet remains standing. And I really think that's a metaphor for the work that we're doing around place. This is an Iowa picture I want to show you. These two women look very much like my grandmother, but I want you to look at their hands and their legs and their bodies. These are farm women who worked really hard all their lives. But yet when you look at their faces, you see joy in this grove that they're standing in. And here are two women from Grand Isle who are also enjoying each other and their lives. And again, the Iowa Grove with these women who have worked hard, and a group of women from Grand Isle who are also enjoying themselves, and from Grand Bayou, waving at us from their little pirogue in the bayou. And I had this picture in here before the news today, but this is, as all of you know, the magical sculpture garden in Chauvin. And a shout out to Gary, who raised some money to fix it. This picture too was about a month ago. And I love what's captured in this garden. And now we know it's going to be kept. So this idea of place and belonging to place is never finished. There will always be more to know than any mind or lifetime can hold. And as I read your recommendations that the collaborative put together, it really struck me that as here in New Orleans and where out in the Western coastal parishes, you can dive and dive into the culture and never touch the bottom. And it's our job to capture as much as we can. And part of understanding the shifting sense of place is being able to recall in photographs, in quotes, in stories, the culture as it changes and as we lose it. So we're living in the shifting sense of place because of climate change, rising sea level, hurricanes, and when the wind shifts in one way and the water goes over the road on any given day, and oil spills. And I'd like to talk a minute about what happened on Wednesday. Because as many of you know, you stayed very close to your television or your radio, and you heard about these tornadoes coming through. And I had this experience. I was watching Chris Franklin on WWL, and he said, oh my gosh, there's one coming. It's coming on the West Bank. And you know how they put those things up where they tell you the time it's coming? And it said 4:06 City Park. Well, I walked back to my safe room because I live about 6 blocks from City Park. And as I was walking back to my safe room, which is my closet, it said, he said it shifted and it's going east and it's going to Araby again. And in that moment, because we have all lived with the destruction of our homes, I watched the destruction of these homes happen and these places happen in 5 seconds, in 10 seconds. It was an amazing piece that the shifting sense of place occurs. So we're all about thinking about loss and change. Landscapes change, places disappear. Loss is more than geography. And this is where I'm very interested. And I know that you guys do workshops on loss. This idea that loss occurs over time, that we have cascading storms, cascading events where there's trauma at each event. And that we need to think about that. And we need to think about how we document that and how we document that loss. So I just picked out a few quotes from all of the quotes I have and all of the interviews I have about loss. It was a very tight-knit community. You could not buy a piece of property. If you wouldn't marry into a family, you wouldn't get a piece of property. At first, I thought it was so isolated, I don't want to go anywhere else. This is beautiful. Now, all those people are gone, empty spaces, a lot of land that went up for sale. And then there is this sense of abandonment. And Tara, I believe that's your photograph I'm showing. But as your recommendations point out, this quote is from a tribal woman who says, to be abandoned, you first have to be considered. We know that we have never been part of a community. We have always relied on taking care of ourselves, as we have so far for centuries and even to this day. We are not abandoned. We have always been overlooked and underserved. And when we read the recommendations that you have created, you hear that comes out. And then finally, we have lost people. Young families have limited resources to reclaim their lives. When they leave for an event, they start to live someplace else that's more predictable and stable. Those very same people continue to come here and bring their people here. They would love to come home. It is not voluntary. It is forced. They do not have the resources to reclaim their lives. And we really need to think about those people who have already left, because as we know, they're leaving all the time. So this again is Chauvin from just a couple of weeks ago. But I've begun to think about what it means for this idea of people leaving, and in the Midwest for towns dying. And I want to read these 2 quotes. I have actually 3 quotes from John Crabtree because he really made me think about it differently. The apparent decline in rural and small town America has been overstated. If Americans think of rural areas simply as economic dead zones, filled with people waiting to leave oppressive conditions, that idea could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And in many ways, that's what your collaborative is fighting against. It could also lead to a mentality that treats rural areas as a national sacrifice area, appropriate only for open pit mining, clear-cut forestry, and fracking, or I would say oil and gas extraction, and other assaults on people and nature. If that attitude prevails, we will have only ourselves to blame. But there is nothing inevitable about the demise of rural areas. That seems to be an underlying value in the work that you all do. There's nothing inevitable about the demise of rural areas. And then he goes on to say, what is most important is that we not give in to the dominant narrative about social and economic conditions in rural and small town America that will lead us to think that this decline is part of some natural process. We can make rural and small town America strong if we have the will to do so. And this to me is a clarion call for us, if we have the will to do so. So now comes the little social science part of this presentation. Science, politics, and knowledge. This idea of whose knowledge and what knowledge and how this knowledge is used. It seems to me that you as a collaborative have spent a lot of time thinking about this, the idea of local knowledge and other kinds of knowledge being used, and the idea that the local knowledge and the people that have it come in first, not at the end of the planning process, not at the end of the grant, but at the beginning. And that value, that knowledge and those people are the values that we hold is important. So a little more social science, and you all can probably point to the page on the CPRA early documents that talks about solutions, structural, non-structural, programmatic. We all know these words. But I put them here for a reason. Where are the people in these words? They're not here. And yet, as you'll see in the next set of photographs, what happens when these occur is it affects people. They're about people, and they're not here. So I love this graph, and I almost use it in every presentation about the coast, because I think John Lopez has done a great thing of putting it in a way that's understandable. But when I looked at it again, I began to think, what if you put something about people in every one of these? What if we intentionally said, here's what happens to people here. And we added people to this. So I want us to think about that. So here's a non-structural strategy. We all know this one, elevation. Here's a good example. And I write some about elevation and freeboarding and that. And here's the question I always have, and some I've raised it to you. What happens to a community when you elevate a home 16 feet in the air? What happens to the sense of community? What happens, as in New Orleans, when you elevate one house 16 feet, another house 3 feet, and the other house stays flat on the ground? What happens to the sense of community? And what happens in Ida, for example, which was a wind event, when you have these houses in the air? What I know from some of the work I've done is when people have used the spaces underneath these elevated homes to keep their old communities alive. But it's the question we should have asked before we told everybody to put their houses 16 feet up. What happens to the community? What happens to them? And here is another thing that shows up in this. It's called public engagement. And this is a LA Safe meeting, I believe. And LA Safe did a pretty good job of taking people's voices and using it to make projects. But lots of times what happens when you have a public meeting is it becomes of something you check off a box. We went to the public, we talked to them, and now let's do what we thought we were going to do. So again, let's think about what it means to have a public meeting where people come first. And finally, and only briefly, the most extreme of adaptive strategies is relocation. which we know is going on now. And we need to begin to think not only about how people leave, where people go to, but how we maintain cultural ties from one place to the other. So what does it mean going forward? I think it means what you guys are doing. It means to create a new narrative, a narrative that challenges the dominant narrative, a narrative that's different than, that's has filled with multiple strategies, that's filled with the voices of a variety of cultures, that is a dialogue of critical civic engagement, that is not just, oh, we're going to talk about this project. We're going to bring people, and it seems to me it's what you've done. You bring people in at the beginning, and these people become how you vet projects. And because we're living in a place that's shifting quicker than we know and faster than we know. And so our obligation is that we need to be in a hurry, but not in a hurry that says we don't use people's voices, in a hurry that includes people's voices first. So I have this quote. Somehow I can't read all of it because of the screen. Gabby, can you move their faces so I can see the whole quote? I hope she can.
I wouldn't be able to, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you about this quote because I can't get all the words.
Pam, would you like me to read it? Would you like me to read it for you?
Yeah, can you see all of the quote?
Yes, ma'am. I can read it.
I can't see it because of their,
Okay.
so would you read it? This is, let me tell you about it. This is a quote. It's 20 years old and it's long, but it's important. And Jonathan, if you could read it, that'd be great.
She wanted us to have dreams and achieve them, not dreams like hers, which she couldn't achieve. She didn't even give herself the chance to achieve those dreams because from the beginning, she said, when I dropped out of school, I knew what I had to do. I was born to work, to get married if that ever happens, have children, raise them, but raise them for something better than what I have. She always said, my children will graduate from high school. They'll earn a degree. No matter if I have to crawl to make a path for my children, I'll do it.
And the reason I included that quote is for the last line. No matter if I have to crawl, I will do this. And it seems to me that that's the will that Crab Tea was talking about earlier. That is the will to make a difference. And so this is my last slide. And I really pondered whether to include the slide or not, because it could be interpreted as the sun setting of the community, but that is not how I'm interpreting it. It is one of the beautiful slides of this area that we live in, that we need to think about what to do with and how we are going to be in it. And so what I'd like to do now, and I'm going to call on some people as people who know me know, and then I'm going to ask you to jump in. When you think about the shifting sense of place, what occurs to you? As you think about the science solutions and the people solutions and the extraordinary people that live in these areas, what occurs to you about the shifting sense of place? So I'll pick on Jonathan first.
You know, I think about our conversation when we started earlier about Christmas being magical. And as a kid, it seemed effortless, but you realize that a lot of intention has to go into the planning to make it magical. You know, making sure that you get the mistletoe, getting the bottles of champagne ready. It all kind of takes planning, intention. And I feel that way now with having an almost 2-year-old, that my sense of place and being connected to Southern Louisiana just kind of happened by my day-to-day life and what we did growing up. And I will, as that shift takes place, I will have to get a little bit creative with how I instill some sense of place, some type of sense of place within my 2-year-olds who will not be able to participate in the things that I participated in within the community that existed in the 80s that doesn't exist anymore today, you know? And that's been tough to grapple with, because I want nothing more than for him to have that experience that I did. But whereas it seemed like it happened a little bit effortlessly for me, it's going to take a lot more effort to make that happen for him.
So how to translate what is gone, what is lost into his life. Yeah, that's great. Maida.
I think back to what started me on this whole path, and that was after the 2016 flood, which in Baton Rouge was the first time that I had ever thought I might need to evacuate, and then might even need to relocate. And when I thought about relocating, I immediately thought, where's everybody else going? Because I don't want to lose the culture. And that put me on this path of working with the Bayou Culture Collaborative. That how can we help people not lose their culture? Whether that's moving from Chauvin to Houma to Baton Rouge, or Baton Rouge to Nashville. For some reason, I always end up in Nashville. But if there's enough people going to each place, they can keep their connections. So that's exactly what I think of when I think of this.
Gary.
Okay, thanks for the question. When I think about a shifting sense of place in biology, in the old days, I think we used to think that things were static. Like, you know, for a long time in the United States, we didn't like forest fires because that was disruptive. And now we realize, well, actually, you're supposed to have the disruption of a forest fire to keep the forest healthy. It was kind of a hard lesson to learn. And the same thing goes with our shifting coast right now. We usually think, well, that's bad. We shouldn't be losing our coast. But if you think about it on the 1,000-year scale, we are supposed to move our coast. It's supposed to happen. And so I want to be a part of that, a part of staying connected to the coast, even while it shifts. And like as humans, I feel like we can put a slab of cement somewhere, and now that cement is going to keep us there forever. And like, that's the wrong way to think about it. We should think about it like a tululu. All a tululu does is it makes a hole in the ground. Like he can do that in one day. And a hurricane comes and the tululu just makes a new house, a simple house, and stays on the coast. And sometimes I think that's a pretty good strategy.
Wow, that was great. Mike.
Well, you know, we were kind of talking over this a little while ago, and I come from a family that on both sides of my family that have migrated as long as we've known, from my great grandfather's generation on, either following petroleum or the timber industries. And so my sense of place is actually more connected to my people rather than an actual location. My grandfather was born on the King Ranch. My great grandfather was a foreman on the King Ranch. I don't necessarily have any connection to that, and I don't own horses right now, but horse culture has always been a big part of my life, and something we've passed on to my son when we have a chance. So my sense of place, and I grew up on the Gulf Coast of Texas, so you know I was out on the water before I drove, and I spent a lot of time in East Texas running trot lines, hunting squirrels, hunting deer. And so I have these places that are important, but they're most important because I did those things with my family. And that was a very intentional thing that was passed on through, that my grandfather felt was very important. My father felt was very important, and I feel was very important to pass on to my son. So not necessarily a geographic sense of place, but definitely that culture that is passed on. kind of allows me to have a sense of place wherever I land. If that
No,
makes
no, that makes great sense. It makes great sense. And we can't talk about it now, but my grandfather and uncles were all foremans on the King Ranch.
Oh, yeah.
So,
We
um,
probably have some connection there.
we do. All right, so now, since I saw who came in, I'm gonna, and he knows I'm coming for him. Corey,
Hey Pam, thank you.
Hey.
I was actually getting ready to message you and say I'm happy to be thrown into the mix, but I should have known you already had me in mind. What really kind of comes to the forefront for me in this and in your wonderful presentation per usual is the necessity of kind of a paradigm shift, and I feel like we have approached what is occurring and even what we expect to occur on Louisiana's landscape from a very reactionary position. We do have a wonderful coastal master plan that has billions of dollars of projects, but at the end of the day, that entire plan is a reaction to the land loss crisis. And it is even projecting how the landscape is going to further degrade and how we would react to that into the future. I have to believe that we have the resources and we have the people that if we can have, true engagement and a better sense of coming together around these issues, that we can have more of a proactive plan for what the future looks like and how we make sure that we maintain as much of everything that we talk about on these calls as possible in terms of a sense of connectivity, a sense of culture, community. And so it really is going to take, I think, a significant shift in the way that we really think and proactively plan versus react. And that's kind of just what's bubbling.
I think you're really right, Corey. It's not one size fits all. It's not, there was a storm, so let's do this. It's what are we going to do? And kind of what Gary said, how are we going to plan for the shift that's going to occur? You're really right. And thank you. You knew I was going to call on you. Thanks a lot. Okay.
Hey, everybody. How y'all doing today? I just, turn my camera on too. I was thinking about art, of course, being an artist, but thinking about this is like one of the ways that we take our culture with us. Art makes culture portable, and it also makes it transmittable. And it's a way that our culture has a tendency to survive even when we have to, when we're forced to move to different places. Or choose to move to different places. And I think that's the beautiful thing about art and how resilient we are as human beings, that we're able to maintain our culture in many ways through our art.
Great. Thank you. And your poem was amazing. Ms. Broussard? Yes, thanks.
Sorry, I had to unmute. For me, it's really, well, it's a lot of stuff because I am a generational New Orleanian and Bayou person. Down the Bayou near Donaldsonville and Pierre Part, we lived. But there's a couple of things here. I'm a Katrina survivor. But in the early 80s, there was a whole bunch of us, Cajuns and Louisiana Creoles, during the oil bust that moved to Saudi Arabia. And it was amazing. They actually made space for us, the oil company, Aramco, where in Dhahran, they had the British with the other American people. And then we were in another compound called Rosh Tanur, and we were with the Venezuelans, French. They didn't mix us with the British, but that was kind of interesting. We were able to kind of keep our culture. They even flew in crawfish for us. It was very interesting. My mom packed a whole bunch of moss to put in the Rosh Tanur area. It was hilarious. And she was able to teach dance. She was a dance teacher in Donaldsonville, Louisiana in the 70s. So it was really interesting how my parents were able to bring our culture there, and they were, a whole bunch of other Cajuns and Creoles that were in that community and we were, it was interesting how our food and everything in another country, we were able to sustain the culture. However, coming back, and it's part of the reason why I became a trauma specialist. I am an artist and an art psychotherapist, but after Katrina, I saw, well, it was even after when I got back after the oil bust, it was like New Orleans was like, it looked like Lebanon to me. It was very abandoned. Didn't look anything like how it looks now. And then Katrina happened, and we have lost a lot of our culture. So my husband, unfortunately, can never make it to these meetings. He was the one that found a Bayou Culture Collaborative, and he was saying that the Neutral Ground Collective, we started this right before the pandemic, focusing on trauma and preservation, that, you know, he wanted us to be a part of it. He's a supervisor for crisis for Orleans, Plaquemines, and St. Bernard parishes. So we're really busy all the time. But anyway, as far as, I do believe wherever you go, there you are, and that we are so culturally rich. However, we do have to make space for those communities that we go to, because during Katrina, Lafayette area really didn't welcome a lot of us, especially we were teachers. I worked for Orleans Parish Public Schools, and they didn't welcome us at all in Lafayette Parish Public Schools. It was really sad. So I think making space wherever people go, like other communities, I would love to have, and that's part of the reason why what we're going to do, our mission, being part of the Bayou Collaborative, is making space through art making traditions, but it would also be trauma informed, and it will allow people to have like their voice in it. Like, here's a community may possibly come into your community. How do you feel about it? Because we have a lot of old wounds in South Louisiana.
Yep.
And we have a lot of historical grief and loss. And all of those things need to be addressed, and it can be addressed through the art making process and being informed. And I would like to train other artists how to do that in a safe space. So yeah.
I think this issue of trauma and disaster is so important and so rarely spoken of that it's really crucial to going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And
there's some really good techniques that we've learned on how to help people regulate their nervous system, because all it is, it's a dysregulated nervous system. And once you have that training, and we can actually, then you can have the dialogue and the conversation where people aren't just like, whoa, are you coming in my space? What's happening? You know? And the other one is, we got to stop these developers coming in every time there's a disaster.
Yeah. So I think that Jonathan's telling me I'm switching it over to him. So I will.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenkins, for your presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time to share everything with us today. Now, one thing that we would like to ask you is, what is your hope for the coast? If you could share that with our group. And then if those of you in the group would also like to share your thoughts, you're welcome to put those in the chat. But we'd like to hear from you, Dr. Jenkins.
My hope for the coast is that we find a way to make the culture live no matter what happens. And that means, I think, that we have to be intentional about preserving what is happening now and to document what has gone on. That we have to have a plan for documenting the lives of those people that are no longer here. And that's my hope.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And thank you for being here with us today.
My pleasure.
Next, I'm really excited to be able to share with you this poem by award-winning poet Xero. It's titled "The Flow of Culture." And Xero is with us here today. And so after we play the poem, Xero, I would like for you just to, if you don't mind, say a few words about, the process of putting this together, if you have any thoughts about that. So with no further ado, this is "The Flow of Culture" by Chancelier Xero Skidmore.
Culture is love. Love is recognition. Recognition is listening. Listening is knowledge. Knowledge is strength. Strength is culture. Culture is love. The foods we eat most, we eat because we love them. The clothes we wear most, we wear because we love them. Our shared hobbies, art, vernacular, and rituals are not arbitrary endeavors. They are the activities and expressions dearest to our hearts. It is possible for a community to retain negative aspects of their culture, but that doesn't make the culture unlovable. It makes it human. And humans, even without a plan, will always find a way to get their hands on some love. Love is recognition. I see color. Therefore, I can help preserve it when others try to erase it from the landscape, or displace it, or miseducate it, or rob it, or ignore it, as if refusing to see it were some noble gesture and not an evasive maneuver. This poem was written on the indigenous land of the Choctaw tribe, long after their tearful trek to the north, long after commerce altered the land beyond recognition. Recognition is listening. I see, therefore I hear. We are the speakers of a trillion hurricane stories, spoken with a morbid pride of our survival. Gallows humor sewn into quilts, oral obituaries shared in remembrance of humans, homes, livelihoods, and dreams. To hear us talk, government planners might presume we've acquired a taste for disruption. They might warn us that our children are listening. Our stories are how we preserve our reality. We've made sure that our children are listening. Listening is knowledge. There's no step in the scientific method called go ask mama and papa, but there should be. You know how brilliant you gotta be to keep generations of family from killing each other, to keep generations of family from starving? What is coastal land loss compared to managing crazy in-laws? What is marsh creation compared to a layoff right before Christmas? How do you make a plan for the land work without consulting the people who have worked the land? These are a lot of questions. Scientific method always starts with a question, but it doesn't always end with knowledge. Knowledge is strength. We possess the pooled intelligence needed to divert all this water. Some puzzles just take more time, and more people, and more momentum, and more faith, and more songs, and more crawfish balls, and more barbecues, and more powwows, and more elders, and more youth, and more humility. We've been smart enough to extract the oil from the land below, but not smart enough to plan for what it does to the land above. Not smart enough to know that greed incurs a cost that our descendants must pay. But everybody gets the message eventually. Earth is a patient teacher, a stern disciplinarian, and a forgiving nurturer. I don't know how many conversations we are away from ending our climate crisis, but I hope we keep running up the numbers. In numbers, they say, there is strength. Strength is culture. Of the 60,000 indigenous peoples who walked the Trail of Tears, it is estimated that between 14 and 17,000 died along the way from exposure, disease, and starvation. That's a lot of men, women, and children sentenced to death by government planners. But what can today's planners learn from that forced migration? What can we all learn from the tribal members who inspired the fallen to get back up, who lifted children onto their backs as soon as their previous caregivers went down, who lifted the spirits of grieving loved ones with stories and songs, who passed on knowledge when they could see that it could keep up better than they could? A people, especially a traumatized people, must elevate themselves at all costs. They must hold firm to the belief that they are special and that uniqueness is not caused to be washed away. That the preservation of that uniqueness makes their survival all the more important, for it represents a culture that the world will never see again. A culture worthy of a plan that protects every bearer of that culture. Culture is love. Love is recognition. Recognition is listening. Listening is knowledge. Knowledge is strength. Strength is culture. Culture is love. Humans will always find a way to get their hands on some love. It is humanity's path of least resistance. So plan accordingly, plan respectfully, and plan culturally. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the power of art, right? That's what art it can do for us. And thank you so much for putting that together, Xero. And I'd like to give you a moment just to talk about this poem, your process, and just kind of give the floor to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yeah, I just it's not a lot of mystique to my process. I just basically I went back and watched all of the talks that that Maida told me about, that she directed me to on the YouTube channel, and I just took some time to try to internalize a lot of it and ruminate on a lot of it before I started writing. I think I actually the first poem I sent in might have given me some direction on the first draft, and then I think by the time I got to a second draft, I sent it to her, and she was like, "This is kind of what we're looking for. I like it." And then of course, you know, I tried to take it above and beyond what she would like. Which is kind of part of my process. I figure if I can get a client to like a poem, uh, and they say this is worth the money, then I try to make it twice as lovable for them, so that they'll hire me back next time. So um, I really connected, and I learned so much from the talks, and it writing these poems for this organization, this poem, and also I've written similar work for the Center for Planning Excellence. It is, you know, forced me to research to a certain extent the topic of climate change, the broad topic of climate change, and also coastal erosion and the migration of these communities. And so, yeah, I've gotten much more passionate about it, even though, you know, it started out as just another gig. It has become something that I'm passionate about, and something that it keeps me up at night, you know, thinking about it, and thinking about how I want to pass this culture on to my uh, children and my nieces and nephews, and also communicate this issue to my peers. And my elders. So I think it is, you know, I'm just so honored to be a part of this, and look to continue to be a part of it in the future.
Thank you so much for that. And I was there in the room when you presented your poem for that CPEX gathering, and it was equally powerful. So you definitely are blessed with a beautiful talent to be able to use words to make people feel deeply. So thank you for sharing that talent with us. The next thing that we would like to do is, this is a look at the greatest hits of 2022. We've got David Ravelay, who put this video together in celebration, just as Xero's poem was a celebration of our year together. We hope that you'll enjoy and be inspired by a bit of our work this past year.
We are delighted to welcome you to the first time when we are trying to bring the cultural coast together.
Aside from the connection that culture gives us, it also gives us a very intimate understanding of coastal land loss issues in a way that many scientists and engineers may not understand.
This is a series to connect those who want to include culture in the community resilience conversation. It's not simply a speaker series. We really want to address issues and take action.
Severe and unnatural weather events are happening around the world and affecting all of us, but mostly Indigenous people and people of color and with less means.
We really need culture to have a seat at the land loss table.
You know, supporting culture sustains ecological knowledge, ties people to the land. We need to put this stuff together, get what we can.
We hear a lot that people are fatigued, frustrated. They feel ignored by policymakers and planners.
Most citizens of Louisiana are not aware of the next 20 years of Louisiana, 50 years, what we're facing.
These are value judgments that were made by people who are in power about what's important to protect, who's important to protect, and the tribal people and other people impacted by these and these Bayou communities were not consulted.
The fight for Black liberation is also a necessary step to achieving climate justice. So Indigenous sovereignty, Black liberation, these are things I want to offer with love to all of you to consider as you continue your work to preserve the culture of Louisiana.
We're not necessarily in touch with the enormous efforts around the world to solve this crisis.
Can we create a legal framework that addresses cultural heritage, environmental harms, and disaster resilience? This is a human rights issue.
We're going to have to listen to each other. We're going to actually have to feel each other's pain.
And one way for us to manage or cope with that disruption is to intentionally engage our culture.
There is an obvious place for a more robust investigation of the cultural dimensions of Louisiana's risk culture.
Questioning what does it mean? How do we stay? How do we remain and reclaim? We have a right to remain in our coastal territories, and we have a right to be in relationship with the waters and the land.
This is essentially traditional ecological knowledge that essentially the results of a centuries or generations long grand experiment. And we need to recognize that as the data set that it is.
We have a battle ahead of us, but we know our strengths and we need to play to those strengths.
There's a lot to still celebrate. There's a lot of beauty on the coast still and in the wetlands.
My hope is that state government starts to address the people issues too. Whether people decide to stay or move, that they are able to stay connected with their communities and their culture.
We take this moment and we share. We share what we have because it is bountiful. We share what we have because we have everything we need, and nobody in any of our communities should be without.
Not only do you learn to listen to other people, you start learning to listen to yourself. What am I feeling? And can I express it however I need to express it, kind of thing?
Because I think we all can be vulnerable and reveal things when we feel safe. To be able to use the attention of another human to let your mind work and get through your feelings.
We love this place, and it is worth saving, and it is worth more than any money and any dollar can buy.
My hope is that we will invest in more resiliency for our coastal communities. I think that it can be done.
My hope is based mostly on the movement towards environmental justice.
We need community members to be able to be in spaces to do this for us. And if that space isn't there, then we need to create it. And we need to pay attention what the nature needs and be good collaborators.
I know how brilliant we are, and I know about our creativity and our ingenuity. But also, I hope that we can have tough conversations and to kind of break this illusion of our separateness.
The hope I have is based on the fact that how much people pull together when things get really tough.
The coast may not end up like we would want it to end up, but I have a huge amount of confidence in nature and human nature and our connections in South Louisiana. We will figure it out. We will come together and figure it out.
Thank you guys for being with us through that video. Let me see if I can get to the next page without. So in light of time, because we're almost at 1 o'clock, we're going to move through these next few slides, but I would like to encourage all of you to stay with us from 1 to 1:30 when we have our informal sharing, because we want to hear from you about your experience with us this year, what things may have stood out to you, what things you might like for us to do next year. So here's a little bit of information about the working group meetings, and of course, these are the working groups and how you can get in touch with those folks. All of this information is also on louisianafolklore.org. If you don't have the chance to write those things down, we can direct you to where you can get more information. So please mark your calendars for Friday, January 20th. That will be our next gathering. This will not go along with our usual format of having a presenter, because we want to just make this more of a discussion about priority planning. So we want to hear from all of you about things that you think we should be focused in on for that year. So we hope to see you Friday, January 20th. Also, huge, great thanks, big round of applause for Mike Saunders and Gabby Evans, who helped us tremendously make this year super special. So thank you both very much for all of your work to make this year a success. And so announcements, if Maida, I know we're going to talk sort of briefly, I guess it's 1 o'clock now, but final report signing on to the statement, if you want to share anything about that.
I just want to let everyone know that we have 40 individuals and 12 organizations that have signed on. And if this is something you want to support, we really encourage you to. At this point, we are focused on getting the people who are already involved with BCC to sign on. And then in January, we will start broadening the circle and asking you to share the request with others. But at this point, we're just focused on those of you who have already been participating.
Thank you. Mike, would you like to say anything in conclusion?
Oh, well, in conclusion, I sure have enjoyed getting to know a lot of you and really enjoyed this work. Even though it looks like my research may be taking me back to Guatemala for a little while, I will definitely be around here again and continue to work in this area and in this discipline or environmental anthropology. And I do want to say, as far as the hope for the coast, I am a pretty pessimistic guy, and I've spent a lot of time looking at climate change, and I have an 8-year-old son, and I have very fatalistic views sometimes of what I think he'll see. But you guys have given me a lot of hope. Seeing people coming together and doing this work just has given me really an awful lot of hope that maybe things will get better with all of our efforts. Thank you everyone for making my time with this job fantastic.
Thank you, bud. We appreciate all you've done for us.
Oh, I might mention too, the final report that I've written is available for anybody who would like to request that. And I'm still working with some of the working groups on the specifics of that. And thanks again, y'all.
Thank you, bud. All right. So again, ways to connect. There's our website. And so now I'm going to stop screen sharing and open this up to informal discussion. So this ends the formal part of our presentation.